So this next section we're going to talk a little bit about the checklist kind of that we just went over, but we're going to do it by theme. So how are some of the ways that you will actually start to implement these steps in your day-to-day LIHEAP administration? And so we'll go through this as a review. We'll have lots of time for questions. This part will go a little faster than the last part, but I'm hoping we cover it with plenty of time. So I think an assumption in all of this, if we haven't made it very clear, it bears repeating that performance measures doesn't just touch one piece of your program. We're not just talking about data collection reporting, right? In order to implement, you're talking about vendor agreements, subgrantee training, your client applications, your IT systems. It touches multiple pieces of your program. And so it's important that as it goes and weaves throughout your program, that you are engaging the appropriate stakeholders in getting involved. You will have an uphill battle. You may get this. You may not even need this. You're so cool with performance measures. You understand what this has said. You've read everything. You've talked to us, and you get it, and you're ready to roll this out. But if you have not engaged your stakeholders, I guarantee you have an uphill battle. The more engaged you make them, the more likely they are to not only comply or get you what you need, but actually go above and beyond to help you figure out what you need. So we'll talk about that a little bit. This includes your agency supervisors and staff. I do want to say that this is a barrier. So if there are agency supervisors in here, we have actually found that one of the primary barriers isn't vendors, getting data from vendors. It's getting the resources and the money and the staffing and the permission to move this forward in your own department. And so we acknowledge that, we get it, and we're willing to help you however we can with that. Your IT department folks who all say it isn't possible, because that's the stock line, no offense, Jenny. It requires a little bit of technical knowledge to work with your IT department, and we've actually met with several IT folks. That's part of our T&TA work that we've done, is that when it gets down into that nitty gritty and you kind of begin to get overpowered by the IT folks, because they do that. They're like, they use their Jedi powers so that you become paralyzed. That's when a prize can step in and begin to talk the technical speak and make it difficult for them to talk back. Subgrantee agency management and staff, that's another important. Many of you have subgrantees you're going to be collecting this data from, either passively, right? You have a central system, you're going to be collecting the data, or actively. If passively, it's a little less work. However, they need to understand the data they're entering, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if they don't understand what they're collecting, you're not going to have good data. On the active side, many of you have subgrantees with different systems that send you a bunch of data at the end of the year or quarterly or monthly. That requires a lot more work to make sure that they are sending you the right information in a consistent format so that you can then take it, compile it, and actually work with it. Vendors, utilities, and delivered fuels, we've talked about this, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Weatherization agency and subgrantees, remember that LIHEAP weatherization is LIHEAP 2. Don't leave it out. It's important to make sure we're collecting data and looking at that work that we're doing, especially in some of your states give 15% or even more in some cases, and it's a lot of money. So it's important that we're measuring the impacts of those dollars. And then other stakeholders, and for some of you this might be the PUC, some of you call it something different. Whatever your Public Utilities Commission is, some of you may have consumer advocacy groups that have partnered with the utilities to riot at all of your meetings. And so there will be other folks engaged that want to know about this work you're doing. When we talk about theme areas, the first is developing policy. Policy that goes into your state plan, policy that goes into your policy manuals, policy that goes into your subgrantees manuals, and policy that may even go into your monitoring, what you're checking for and looking for. Policy is interwoven throughout the LIHEAP program, and implementing performance measures means taking a look at this policy a little bit closer in some areas. For example, when we talk about prevention and restoration measures, and energy burden for that matter, picking out, identifying which are mandatory, and then any additional optional measures that we've listed that your agency is deciding to collect. That's a policy decision. Is it important enough for us to collect this information? Do we value this information, and is it worth the investment of time and resources? The other is grantee measures. Nicholas gave an example earlier on that in Wisconsin and in other states, adding in ratepayer funds into this model that we're proposing gives you a much broader view of the work you're doing. Even though it's not required to report to OCS, some of you may say, we want to measure that. In Arizona, we talked about the water, right? Even though it's not a required measurement to OCS, what it is it's giving them a better picture of what their clients are looking at in terms of energy burden, and it may be something that's proposed to OCS for future collection. So when you make policies, you're not only deciding what optional measures you want to choose that we've set out, but what additional measures might be helpful for you. As we talked about, defining imminent risk, some of you have definitions that maybe have been sitting in a dusty manual that you might need to take a look at because these performance measures require you to really gauge whether or not a household is at imminent risk for every application, and that might not be work that's been done in the past. And then weatherization agency reporting cost and compliance, and this applies to both, and Nick will talk about it as well, but what do you do when a utility or a vendor or your weatherization agency says, too bad, so sad, we're not giving you the data? And so there are some decisions you need to make at a state level about how to deal with that and what the policy is for dealing with folks that don't want to give you data. In energy burden, some additional things to think about are client confidentiality. In fact, we had a call the other day where that was a primary concern of the utility. And in some cases, these are easy to resolve. Once again, for this particular group of utilities in the state, they seemed, what's that word you use, assuaged? They seemed less prickly about confidentiality when they realized that a statewide waiver could be done with language that they helped to develop. So it was a simple solution, but it was something that they wanted to see the LIHEAP office take as much interest and heart about as they do about protecting their own customers. Fuel prioritization and vendor prioritization, Nick's going to talk about that, and once again, vendor compliance issues. So when a vendor does not want to give you this data, what are the steps your state is going to take? We've talked about this, so I'm just going to go through once again very quickly. Determining your state's criteria for imminent risk is important, and it needs to correspond with existing manuals. And then working with LIHEAP weatherization contractors and in some case energy assistance subgrantees or providers is important to establish what the criteria is for equipment and repair and replacement, restoration and prevention, and the same with coordinating reporting. You know, are you going to require that to be reported at year end? Are you going to require it as part of every audit? How are the weatherization and energy assistance folks going to get you that information for each household?
So we just did a webinar last week on delivered fuel vendors. And during that webinar, we talked about prioritizing which fuels and vendors to work with first. And so when I use that phrase, I don't use it lightly because what we want to talk about first is that the requirements are the requirements. And if you're working to meet those, a prize can provide recommendations for you to prioritize where you start your efforts first. So as this slide gets into, grantees are required to collect data for all types of fuels. However, we know that some states, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and even Texas, have been collecting this data for a long time. Others are just starting to engage their energy vendors now. So we have recommendations for you if you're just starting this process and struggling with where to start first, what chunks to bite off. Similarly, we have just got a couple questions in about how to develop vendor compliance policy. So an email came in yesterday that said some of our vendors aren't willing or able to provide information due to costs or other issues that they mention. Some vendors are even asking that the state pay for the data collection costs incurred by LIHEAP in terms of asking for energy burden and cost data. So the responses for that a prize can offer are varied. I want to, again, mention that Apprise is available to jump on conference calls with your vendors to help you work through these issues. But, Apprise staff can't be on every call in every place at the same time. And so one of the things that we want to give you with is the tools to handle those questions. And what we often provide as tools is just what meaning LIHEAP dollars has for the state, right? You're providing a lot of money to some of these utilities that are really reducing their arrearages, that are really helping their bottom line in terms of the debt that they have on their accounts. And so there are a lot of arguments that you can make about the power of LIHEAP, the utility of LIHEAP, and the importance that LIHEAP has for your low-income customers. And that may not be a very powerful argument for some vendors, and so there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, so to speak. But, it's up to the state to determine the policy of how you're going to deal with those issues of noncompliance. You are going to have some vendors who are going to say absolutely not. And there's ways to encourage them to give you the data. And even if you've exhausted all those steps, there are further solutions that you can work with us, if you need to develop to really answer some of those concerns that they have. But I want to talk about prioritization of fuels first, because this is something that's come up in a lot of our conversations recently with grantees. So in the instructions that are outlined for the performance data form, it says that to reduce the burden associated with vendor data collection, grantees are only required to collect annual energy bill data from their top 5 natural gas, their top 5 electric, their top 10 propane, their top 10 fuel oil, and their top 10 other vendors based on the number of LIHEAP clients assisted within the state. And we want to stress that those are the requirements. However, we know that some of you are working towards those and really struggling with some of those other groups of vendors. So these are our recommendations for how you were to prioritize your work in the state. So we would identify your first priority as collecting data for the fuel that represents the greatest share of home energy expenditures for low-income households in the state. And that's really going to differ by state, of course, as you definitely know. We have looked at data from Florida, right? Electricity is by far and large the main fuel that represents the greatest share of home energy expenditures. We've looked at Vermont. Fuel oil is actually probably the largest there. Natural gas is the largest in a lot of Midwestern states. Propane is even the largest in some states here and there. So we want to stress that that's something that you should start with, where your clients are spending most of their money. Step 2 we would identify as collecting electricity data for all clients. Why do we say that? Because, again, we want to capture the whole household picture. We want to get that baseload electric in there because we understand that that's really part of a household's energy burden. The third step we would say is to really attempt to cover at least 90% of your clients by adding another fuel to your first couple steps. So in some states, you might have 90% of your expenditures go to electric, but there are a lot of states that aren't like that. We'll show an example in a second. But, we're going to say in most cases, you're going to start with your natural gas, probably. You're going to go to your electric, and then you're going to look for that third delivered fuel. Now, we know that collecting information from delivered fuel clients is going to be a little bit more difficult in some cases, but we think it's important to really work and start to work to capture that information because it really does represent a large portion of the cost that clients are paying each year. And we have heard from some grantees that, well, what if we don't know what the greatest shares are in terms of client home energy expenditures by fuel type? And that's information that we can provide. So Apprise works closely with OCS on the allocation formula, and there is really interesting, good, publicly available data in that allocation formula regarding client energy expenditures. And we've worked on a data set to provide you with information on your low-income clients' expenditures, and we can absolutely give you more information on that. So please contact us if you have questions. This kind of, is a slide pulled directly from the webinar that we gave last week, which is online in both the slide deck and the recording. But we wanted to pull it in just as a reminder of what prioritization of fuels looks like for Iowa. Yep, quick question.
If most of your clients come from gas, let's say, the recommendations that you're making, like 5 gas and 5 and 10
Yep.
fuel, if that doesn't apply to your state, will that vary, or you want the same for everybody? Whether
the same for everyone, but we do understand that there are some states where there just aren't 10 delivered fuel vendors, or where there just aren't 5 natural gas vendors. For example, in DC, there's like 1 gas vendor, essentially. There's 1 electric vendor. So in those cases, we're not asking you to collect 5 where they just don't exist. And that's kind of, there is some straightforward logic in that sense of, if there's special cases, like we know in some states, there's just no fuel oil in some states. No clients use fuel oil. If you look at the percentages, it's like 0.005%. In those cases, we understand that it doesn't make sense to collect data if there's no clients that use fuel oil.
If fuel oil is not the biggest portion of your state, do you still want 10?
Yes, you still, to meet the requirements, you still need to collect fuel oil, even if it's not the largest portion. So again, these are kind of recommendations for prioritization if you can't meet the federal requirements from the outset. So these are kind of our first steps for where we want you to focus your work to meet the federal reporting requirements.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think it's maybe worthy of adding to that, because this question came up in work group discussions, is that if you are a state that collects more, it's okay to report more. You don't have to put in extra efforts to reduce the amount that you're collecting in order to meet that rule.
Yeah, thank you. That is a great point. So again, these are minimum requirements. The top 5, top 10, top 10, those are minimum requirements. And we know that a lot of states go well beyond that, and that's great. And you may, even after meeting the federal reporting requirements, want to go further to get a better understanding of what's in the state. As kind of OCS has mentioned to a lot of grantees at this point, they're looking for a good faith effort to meet the reporting requirements, and that's what we are here to help you do. And so to kind of work off this example that we have in front of us, on the right side of your screen, you're going to see % of total low-income household expenditures for heating and cooling. And again, this is developed from the LIHEAP allocation formula. So you'll notice that in Iowa, as an example, most of their clients are spending their money on gas. Right? The next is then electric, and the next is propane. So besides the fact that this kind of perfectly fits into our model, why would we recommend what we would based on their information? So our first recommendation is that if Iowa has really struggled to meet the federal reporting requirements, that they would prioritize their data collection from the state's gas vendors, because that is the fuel that represents the greatest share. Of course, you can see that from the data to the right. Next, to continue with our stream of thought, we would recommend that Iowa would then work to collect electricity data for all clients, because we're trying to capture that complete picture of the household's energy usage. And finally, we're recommending that Iowa attempt to collect data from the state's propane vendors, since they also represent a quite large share of low-income client expenditures in the state. Again, these are kind of our recommendations for your prioritization. So if you're really struggling to meet those top 10, top 5 requirements, these are our first steps that you can take towards meeting those. So the next step would be your prioritization of vendors. You've identified the fuels that you really need to work on. Now here are the vendors that you really need to work on. So electric vendors, we want you to attempt to collect data from at least 5 vendors as the federal reporting requirements state. But sometimes you might have a smaller number of vendors that serve more than 90% of your clients. So that's what you want to focus on first. You really want to focus on getting those big vendors that capture a lot of clients before you really move on. Same thing with natural gas. You want to attempt to get those big 5. And for delivered fuel vendors, we want you to attempt to collect data from at least 10. We understand that this is going to be tricky. There are a lot of rural vendors, and they might not have good data collection procedures. I've been hearing that some people track information on paper still, that some even have volunteers as staff. Those are all considerations that you're definitely going to have to take into account and deal with. But we want you to really work on first getting top 10, and if you can't, maybe a smaller number of vendors serve more than 50% of your clients that use delivered fuel for that main heat, and that's where you should start. You really want to get the most bang for your buck, and that's what these slides are all about. Did you have a quick question? Yes.
I had more of a comment, but
Yep.
you'd have to go back to 60 there, I guess, since I'm from Iowa.
Yep.
When you focus on expenditures, this is all well and good, and the end result is we come up with the same conclusion, but this sort of gives a skews reality.
Absolutely.
Expenditures based on cost.
Yes, I know, and that's a great point, and we've heard that from a number of grantees when we provide this information. And what we developed this data for is kind of a baseline, because some states didn't have good information at their fingertips. But we recognize that, we've heard from California, we've heard from a number of states that they've got better data on this from their own systems, and that's great. And we would encourage you to use that data if you have a better picture of your client's expectations.
Well, yeah, because I think you almost have to look at, for Iowa, for example, 75% of, forgetting the expenditures, 75% of households, whether they're LIHEAP recipient households or just Iowans in general, heat with natural gas. That's
Yep.
the primary heat source.
Yep.
I think that, I remember the numbers now, about 15 to 20% heat with electric. And then the LP is about 10%. But for my program, where the top, okay, so if I go to gas, which we're already getting this data, but if I, gas and electric, that alone, those two top 5 categories represent about 80 to 85% of all LIHEAP recipient households.
Yep.
That LP, where it looks like a huger chunk, is really, my biggest LP vendor has 300 LIHEAP
And
recipients.
we've heard that from a lot of
So,
grantees.
if I take which I will, I'll take my top 10
Yep.
propane folks. That represents maybe out of 85 to 90,000 LIHEAP households, 2,000.
Yeah, and that's something we've heard, and it's definitely going to be a challenge. So again, those minimum requirements will get you what you need for the form, but they might not get you good information about your program. And so I was just talking about this with the Oregon LIHEAP staff. They were saying, well, a lot of our households we might not get complete data on. And a lot of them are served by munis and co-ops, which we're going to, really have to work hard to get information from. And these are really kind of important points to think about, because they're good arguments for going beyond the minimum requirements, right? If you want to get better information on propane usage and cost of your clients, then you would probably need to go beyond those minimum reporting requirements. Now, again, it's not required for you to do that, but you'd get really great data about your program were you to move forward with that kind of data collection. So again, this is kind of a first step. These are developmental. These are baby steps towards the bigger concept. But if you go beyond these reporting requirements, it will be even better for your program and even better for the data that you have available. Do you want to?
So there are 2 pieces I want to add, and I might be jumping ahead, but it seems more appropriate here. The first is you are going to use this data. And so we had a discussion in Oregon, Idaho, and Washington last week with CAPs there who are just as interested in this data as you are, believe it or not. And they said, we want to be able to talk about how we've decreased energy burden as part of our system, the work we're doing in our system. And the challenge, of course, is that if the state is only working on getting data for those top vendors in our state, that's largely urban. And so there are a whole set of caps on the outskirts of the state, and many of you are in the same situation where it's the rural areas that are covered by munis and co-ops and moms and pops. And so think about that too. How do you want to be able to report information for your state? I know Heather talked with vendors recently. They're increasingly interested in that rural-urban divide. And so that's another reason, an incentive to think about who you collect from and strategize appropriately. The other piece I want to say is that it may be worth going outside your top 5, top 10 if another state is doing the work for you. So let me give you an example. There are multi-state vendors who have already worked in your neighboring state on negotiating a data exchange, negotiating a vendor agreement, and they've got it all worked out. For you to tag along to their existing agreement and streamline the process, either all the data is coming from a central office or it's not that difficult for them to pull it for an additional state, it may be worth going above and beyond who you thought you would be working with in your top 5, top 10, because it's very little burden. So I would encourage you to talk with your neighboring states, those who you know you're sharing with utilities with, see if they've already established all of this work and done all of this negotiation for you, because many utilities are willing to provide more data if it's from a central system or a large system for other states, especially if it means one kind of form and streamlined reporting. So give that some consideration. We'll be talking about that at the NUAC conference during our session on performance measures as well. We have an example or two of that. So IT department, they are critical to get involved with this. They're going to be not only making sure that the fields are in the right places when it comes time to collect data, but they're also going to be the ones who help you pull together reports. And so making sure that the fields match what's on the application, which is the next piece, is really important. Also making sure that there is the capacity to be able to pull the right data to be able to send to vendors, and then the capacity to take that compiled information from vendors and play with it. Once again, it doesn't necessarily require a big centralized database, right? But it does require someone with Access or Excel skills that knows how to move data around, will be able to track why there's an error or something coming up. It really just means having someone who knows what they're looking at. And any of you know that an IT person that understands policy and program is worth their weight in gold. So we're not just talking about handing them the specs or the business requirements, but helping them understand why we're collecting it will help them help you, I guarantee it. So it is worth having this discussion with your IT, getting them involved from the beginning and talking through all those little pieces. Are the systems able to talk with one another? Is there security architecture that's going to get in the way if you want to collect central data or merge data across subgrantees? All of those little things that we don't think of because we don't have those kind of brains, or most of us don't. That's what they can help you think through and ask questions about. We also have weatherization agency information systems. As we mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about again, many weatherization agencies collect the information you need to do your household report. Some even collect what you need to do performance measures, but it's a matter of getting the information out of the system and to you. And so that's an important discussion. Is that automated? Is there a crosswalk between systems, or are they handing you an Excel spreadsheet? And then once again, the reporting system, as we said, it doesn't need to be sophisticated, but you do need to be able to do math. Many people can't do math. So it's important to have an IT person or someone who knows how to analyze data that can pull the data out and parse it out the way it needs to be on that form, right? By fuel type. That's a big one. All the data is separated and categorized by fuel type, as well as pulling out that top 25%. It is a simple calculation unless you don't know math. And if you don't know math or don't like math, it's no fun, and you want someone else to do it, and so they should know about it. Subgrantees. This is, for those of you, I know not all of you have subgrantees. I would actually change this a bit. I would call this subgrantees or your county offices, because some of you may not have what you call subgrantees. They may be an extension of your office, but the bottom line is that you have intake workers probably outside of your office, or application processors, someone who's touching the data and touching the application and has to understand what you're asking and what you mean by it. And so in addition to subgrantees, we're talking about offices that may just be extension of your own. Helping them to understand why they're collecting it and what they're collecting is important. Part of this is so that the client application is right. And this doesn't just mean for subgrantees who have different applications across the state. Setting minimum requirements and making sure certain fields are on that application is important so that you have the data. It's also important to talk to your subgrantees about, are we asking this in a way that makes sense? So if we are asking clients to fill out the application prior to their visit, are we asking the questions in a way that they aren't going to call our office or barrage our office with calls to say, what do you mean by this question? What do you mean primary fuel type? You should not put primary fuel type in your application. The wording, you know what that means, but a client does not. So finding ways to talk with your intake workers to say, on the ground, how do I translate this so that we're not getting a bunch of customer service calls and we know we're getting the right most accurate information from clients. The other is caseworkers. There are places where caseworkers are going to need to use discretion. For example, imminent risk, understanding what that means and applying it, how much discretion are you giving them, and making sure they have the appropriate training to use their knowledge in a way that is useful to you. And anyone that tracks data in a central system will be able to tell the intake workers that aren't getting it, because you'll see that one intake worker has classified all of their clients as in imminent risk or has restored, whereas the rest of the intake workers in the agency, it's more scattered. So there are ways to even look at patterns and to address those issues afterwards, but it's much easier to get it training beforehand. And then information systems, subgrantee managed systems. There are many states where their subgrantees use different systems and then report a set of data to the state at the end of the year or quarterly or monthly. And so it's really important to both for weatherization and for your subgrantees or even your offices to understand what it is you're asking of them. And as you can all see on the screen, if you go into your packet, this is in your packet. We visited, we had the honor, and really I'm being sincere when I say honor, of visiting Texas and Arizona and Oklahoma and talking to them about what data they currently collect from their subgrantees and what we would need to add to that in order to be sure that they could collect on upcoming performance measures. This set of data on this sheet is the minimum data you need from your subgrantees to complete the household report, grantee survey, and the performance measures. So if you are talking to your subgrantees and giving them a template to fill out or a report they need to complete, this encompasses all the data that you need. We've put in here examples of, for this particular example, we've made it easy because in most of these states we're saying we want the rawest data you can give us. We don't want subgrantees compiling data, right? The more that happens, the less accurate it is. Not that they can't do math. It just makes it easier for them, and it makes it easier for whoever's pulling the data together at your state. But by just reporting payments, you'll notice Charlotte Lucas is on here 3 times for 3 different payments. And so, as you go through each, you may have a different set of requirements, but each of these columns is what you need to do the work. The other thing is that you may customize this for your weatherization versus energy assistance. In Arizona, the only people that do equipment repair and replacement is their weatherization team. So they took those columns off when it came time to give it to their energy assistance providers, right? You don't need all the columns for your energy assistance providers. They were also able to take columns off for their weatherization providers. So you can cut this different ways, but these are the data elements you need, and we've had a lot of people ask us for this. So take a look at it, and then we can help you parse out how you might want to cut this up. We talked about this a little bit already, but client applications are one piece that you're going to want to tackle, and if you haven't tackled them already, you can imagine they need to be done soon. Adding main fuel type to the client application, and as Heather was nodding at me, you definitely want to define what this means, main heating fuel type. And there's a fancy thing called cognitive pre-testing. You don't need to call it that. You can just call it testing. But having an applicant or two take a look at your draft application and to see if they can actually fill it out, or even having an intake worker act on behalf, knowing what they know about clients, to test it and make sure you're asking the questions in a way that is meaningful and where you're going to get the best information is really important. Making sure you modify the release of information. And once again, we're saying vendors and attorneys in the development of this language is important. It should be as collaborative as possible. Adding vendor account numbers to the client application, both for main fuel and electricity, regardless of where the payment is being made. And adding home energy status to the application will allow you to get the information that you need in order to collect and report data related to performance measures. We've talked a lot about this. I'm just going to go over a few of these. We've talked about the importance of a waiver when working with vendors. Client identification is important. Remember that Nick showed you the vendor data exchange, and that was actually developed in a meeting with Pacificor, Oregon and Utah and others, Washington, all kind of met, and Pacificor helped us complete what they would need to see from all of you and what they could return back. But that may look different for some other, your other utilities. Pacificor, in order to identify a customer, wanted, for example, a service or unit number. Other people may want something else. They may not want a name and address, although we're really advising that because it helps with if they're mismatched account numbers. But identifying the client is really important. How do vendors want to see that data come in? Schedule is important in your vendor agreement. Don't just say we want the data for the last 12 months at no cost. But for some of you, it's going to be important to actually lay out the process, especially if you have vendors that don't comply with what you usually ask them. It's going to be important to put that in a vendor agreement. The format, it may be Excel or computerized, but whatever you're using needs to be put in your vendor agreement and agreed upon by everyone. And then, the vendor agreement explicitly lists all issues. So I think that's kind of a given. We talked already about identification of top vendors. Nicholas covered that. I'm very aware that that's one of those glaze over moments, not because he's a bad speaker, but because it's not a intuitive concept. And we're also saying, as we tell you and give you this advice, we're saying, but you can take it and use it a different way. So it's not concrete, it's not black and white. We're making recommendations based on our work with folks in the field, but we know that there are always exceptions and questions and perhaps people that want to build upon that. So please be sure to put that forward. It is not black and white, cut and dry, and it shouldn't be. So we anticipate questions and we're happy to hear them. Once again, the vendor agreement, just like the client waiver, should all be worked out in collaboration. You may want to present them with example language, but you better bet that by the end of the day, their attorneys are going to spend hours tearing it apart. So don't spend too much time getting the perfect vendor agreement put together before running it past their attorneys, because they will absolutely rip your work apart and your time apart, and that's not a good thing. So. We've talked about this as well. This is really an opportunity if you have bad relationships with your weatherization agency to improve those. It's not only important for you to comply, but it's also just a great opportunity to talk with them about the fact that they'll be able to use this data too. Remember, at the end of the day, this is not about, well, it is, but it's not just about fulfilling a requirement, right? It's about producing data that will help you run your programs better. And every weatherization office we've talked to when we visited in states, including those we didn't anticipate good meetings with, have been really excited about the fact that this is producing data that they too can use to target their households. Not just with LIHEAP weatherization funds, right? I mean, LIHEAP weatherization funds are what we're looking at, but for most of them, they're using LIHEAP weatherization as part of a much bigger portfolio. And so this is giving them some insight into all of their clients across all of their funding types. And so it's valuable information for them as well. It's important to develop a LIHEAP ID. You need to, even before performance measures, have unduplicated data. If you're going to unduplicate data when you're using information from two different departments or agencies, you have to have some way to deduplicate it. Social Security number is awesome. I mean, that's a pretty standard. But if you don't use that, what are some other ways that you can develop an ID? And that's something that we can help talk you through at Apprise. Making sure, once again, that you're coding equipment repair and replacement and giving training to staff in that regard. And then data exchange procedures. So are you expecting this information quarterly, monthly, annually? What date do you need it by? What's your turnaround time? And how do you want it? Do you want it in Excel access, or do you want them to be inputting into a database that you already have? Whoops. Are there questions? There will be lots of opportunities, so if you're thinking about it, that's okay. Okay, moving on. All right, so the timeline. Oh, did you want to do this? Go ahead. Okay, so the timeline for performance measures, many of you know that right now you should be preparing for data collection, but there's still time. So in fiscal year 2015. So if you're not one of the overachievers, don't like get down on yourself, but you should hurry up because it's coming. Beginning in October, you need to start collecting this data. And so that's why we're talking about the steps, needing to have the client waiver in place on the application so that when you do get permission from the vendors and do work that out, you can actually exchange data, making sure the fields are in the client application so you're already collecting that data, even if you're not quite sure how you're going to process it yet, right? Having those step building blocks in place is really important. And then in fiscal year 2017 is when you're actually going to report the data. So that'll be January of 2017. You're going to report it for 2016. So collection begins in October, and then you're going to start putting all that data you've collected to work the next October to report in January, if that isn't confusing. So I'm not going to go through this list other than to say here's kind of, we have this PowerPoint online, or we will have it online. Is this my PowerPoint? Okay. So all of these pieces that we've talked about fit in this timeline. So engaging stakeholders, you should be doing that from the beginning. Developing your policy so you know what you're measuring. Engaging your IT systems should be up front. Your subgrantee agreements need to be updated, so the information you're collecting from subgrantees and any minimum language you want them to use in their release of information should be in place in their subgrantee contracts by this October. I know some of you are working on them, so if you need help making sure that you've caught everything or want to just run by your amendments by a prize, we've done that a lot in the last few weeks and months. We've taken a look at drafts just to make sure you've caught everything that you should be catching. In terms of application forms, many of you are getting those ready to print, and so updating those to make sure that the right fields are in there, so the fuel type and the home energy status and all of those things that you're going to need to be in those application forms. And some of you mail them out prior to October, so that's a tight timeline if you haven't already started working on that. Once again, a prize can help you take a look at that. Vendor agreements, updating those for fiscal year 2016 is very important, even though you might not work out the data exchange details, right? Those may stretch a little bit into 2016, but you should still have an agreement from the vendors that they will be providing you data at minimum. And then weatherization agency, all of those same things. If you're going to need data from them, they need to also update their applications, their IT systems, and whatever's necessary. And so working with them is very important. In 2016, you need to collect the data and then to report it at the end of the year. And so this is just going to be about furnishing updates, implementing your policies. I guarantee that there's going to be training needed and additional training needed. So when you may need to tweak language somewhere on your application when you realize that clients don't understand what you're asking them. Your intake workers may say, I think there's a better way to collect this data. I think we're making it too complicated. And so this is about working out the kinks, right? Now, ideally, you'd do this before you start, but we know in reality that it's also going to happen as you go. So updating your system specs, application forms, and doing training, making sure that data exchange is developed. By now, you should have permission in your vendor agreement. So now it's a matter of just ironing out how do we get this data to and from utilities. And there are states, in fact, one in the room, I think, that is already testing this. So the utilities have agreed to do test data just to make sure that that exchange system works. And that's a good idea. And same with your weatherization agency. And finally, 2017, report and use the data. And I'm not going to go through this list, but the idea is to take all that great data that you've collected and begin to put it not only into a report, but understand how you can use it to shape your program for the next year, update your state plan, and so. Are there any questions? Awesome, pause.
So I think just in terms of a checklist of what to do, those last slides really clarify for each of you what things to focus on and when. And I think it's so important to think about this as an order of operations as well. What do you want to focus on now rather than later? And once these slides are posted online, you'll be able to grab this, take it, go down the list, check by check, and see what you've done and see what you still need to focus on. So to kind of wrap this all up, we wanted to focus on resources that are available for you currently, because we understand that this is a lot of work, and we want to provide you with the support that you need to implement any changes, any policies, any data exchanges that you're working on now. And we'll also cover some of the kind of more advanced resources that are available for you on the performance management website. So just in terms of recent webinars for your resources, there's been a number in the past year or so that focus on both different reports and performance measures in particular. So first, of course, was the 2014 House report, and there's a long webinar online available on the performance management website, and that's the URL. Second is the performance data form. So there was an in-depth discussion of exactly what you need to put into the performance data form in OLDC. We also did a webinar on building vendor relationships, so exactly how to have that conversation with your vendors about getting data, developing a partnership, ensuring that your vendor agreements have all the information that you need, ensuring that your application has the correct client waiver language that's reviewed by the vendor. And just last week, we conducted a delivered fuel vendors webinar, which also focused on how to prioritize fuels and vendors in terms of meeting the federal reporting requirements. So I realize that showing URLs isn't the most helpful thing to do, but once it's available online, you can directly click on those links and you'll be taken to the webinars that are posted as well. There are also a number of tools which have been included in your packets. So the Performance Measures Data Collection Guide goes through step-by-step exactly what data you need to collect. We also provided you with energy vendor data exchange templates and the sub-grantee data exchange templates. And as you notice, they do have cover pages on each one. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of see what's underneath each one, but in the top right-hand corner, there's an identifier of exactly what data exchange template it's referring to. There's also, of course, resources available on the ACF website, the form, the official instructions, and then back to the performance management website, we have the frequently asked questions. And I really encourage you, if you haven't been to the frequently asked questions page yet, it's a great place to start if you have any burning thoughts about exactly how to treat certain situations. We've put a lot of the information that we've previously provided to grantees on that link, so it's available to everyone. Of course, there's also data available in the data warehouse on the performance management website. There's household report data, there's grantee survey data, and there's eligible population data, and those are direct links to each. And data is going to be released as reports to Congress are released as well. So currently you have up through 2010 available to you in the data warehouse. And just a quick introduction, I don't want to step on Heather's toes too much, but there's also a grantee self-assessment tool. So there's lots of resources available on this performance management website. And sometimes it might be difficult for a grantee to discern what resources exactly they need to handle a problem that they're encountering. So this grantee self-assessment tool, which we're going to demo a little bit later, is going to work to alleviate that problem a little bit. You're going to be able to really delve into what resources cover which topics. Any questions about the resources that are currently available? And also, of course, a prize is available as well. Okay,